So with that, I'll pass it on to Thansha and the story of tech enablement at Peloton.
Amazing. Okay, I will just share my screen because I've made a presentation for you all. Okay, everything's looking good. You can see everything. Okay, perfect. Awesome, so we'll get started. Like Marco mentioned, hello, my name is Thansha. Seeing some friendly faces on here, that's always really nice. But for those of you who I haven't met, I lead tech learning at Peloton. And I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't follow Peloton tradition and share my leaderboard name. So you can find me, it's just Thansha. Perks of having a unique name. Find me on leaderboard. We can do some classes together. I am very competitive. We might not be friends at the end, but it'll be a good time, I promise. Okay, so before I chat a little bit about tech learning at Peloton, I just wanted to give you a little bit of context about what Peloton is. So, and why kind of this function is something that we have invested in. So Peloton has over 6 million members who complete more than 100 million workouts just last quarter. I'm terrible with numbers, but these feel like very large numbers to me. And so technology is really core at what we offer our members, whether it's through our bike, our tread, or through the app. And so like many of you, enabling technology teams to build and and to innovate is absolutely critical for our business. And also in terms of scaling that across, the millions of members and hundreds of millions of workouts that they do each quarter is really, really important. So I'm a bit of a storyteller. And so I'm going to take you along with me on this journey that I've been on in terms of shaping tech learning at Peloton. Yes, spinning up a new function, the journey, there's going to be many, many fitness puns throughout this, another fun Peloton tradition. I've been at Peloton for 10 months. And so while 10 months can seem like a short time, for those of you who work in tech, you know that sometimes months can feel like years. And that's definitely been my experience. So this roundtable will take you through that journey. And I've broken this journey down into like 4 key milestones. And so that's the journey that I'll take you on. So first, really my approach to understanding the business was kind of one of my first milestones. Next was understanding how we set up tech learning as a product and really using product thinking as a part of that. Then our third milestone was how we leverage data to get buy-in and build trust. And then finally, as you might have guessed, I'll chat a little bit about how we planned while staying nimble so that we could really respond to the needs of the business in this very dynamic marketplace that we find ourselves in. So kicking things off with our first milestone, and really where I started my Peloton journey, which was just understanding the business 10 months ago when I first started. So as you might have guessed, as being L&D professionals that you all are, that I wanted to start with some type of assessment. Typically, this looks like a survey of some type of sorts when you're thinking about a traditional learning needs assessment. But I was brand new to Peloton and onboarding remotely, so I obviously wanted to meet some people. And I knew tech learning as a function itself was brand new. It was a brand new concept to Peloton. Obviously, my leader, who's the VP of Platform Engineering, had a deep understanding of it. A few other new leaders that we had brought in who were coming from places like Facebook and Google also had an understanding of what tech learning is, but it was still a very, very new kind of idea for most of the business. And so instead of doing a traditional learning needs assessment through a survey, I instead had hundreds of conversations and spent a lot of time on Zoom meeting people. And I decided I wanted to be very, very strategic about it. And so I broke down the conversations into 4 different buckets. And these were the people that I targeted in terms of setting up conversations to really not only understand what their needs were and what they were seeing, but also just to talk about what tech learning is, what I had done at previous companies, and what I could do at Peloton. And so those groups were, as you might have guessed, engineers. This is the largest base when it comes to our research and development employees. So they are, a critical user base of anything that we would be building. And the other group, and this is kind of one of my favorite things about being in tech learning, is there is always, when you're in hypergrowth, there's always a keen group of employees that act as subject matter experts that want to do peer-to-peer learning. They want to mentor, they want to coach. And I, joining Peloton in 2021 after its explosive growth during the pandemic, I knew there would be these groups of people that were doing this as the business was scaling. And I was right. There was lots of them. And I love talking to other people that are passionate about coaching and teaching and learning. So I spent a lot of time chatting with subject matter experts too, to understand, what were they doing? What were their pain points? What were they seeing work well? And where could we fill in some of those gaps? Obviously spent a lot of time talking to leadership. But one of the things that I wanted to do differently at Peloton was that I really wanted to build a strong partnership with talent as well, and with our talent team. And so I spent a lot of time talking to our talent, our talent team as well. So talent management, talent systems, all of these people, and really building a strong understanding with them about what tech learning did, how it's a little bit different than what they might be doing, and how we could partner. So instead of really building kind of parallel, how could we work closely together and share and become strong partners? And those conversations were really great because it got me tapped into Peloton's talent community. And so I've also built a really, really strong relationship with those folks. And I talk to them 4 or 5 times a week. And we really build together in terms of the systems and stuff that we're all working towards. So these conversations were really, really helpful. They helped me understand, what are the needs of the business? Where are the things that we're doing well so far? And where can my team really support in some of that? And, because I was brand new, we could really shape some of these conversations as really blue sky. And also, I could also really understand the things that weren't working. And people were very honest because I was new. And so we were able to kind of get a lot of insights that I think we wouldn't have been able to get if we had done a traditional survey style learning needs assessment. So lots of conversations, lots of insights. But I report into engineering, so I knew qualitative inputs wouldn't fly for the investments that I was going to be asking for based on these conversations. So this is when I started to work really closely with a team called our Platform Insights team, and very lucky to have some data scientists staffed to this work. So while I was having these conversations, what I started to do was work with these data scientists to dig into a couple key metrics and numbers that would help me even further understand some of these qualitative insights that were coming out of the conversations. And so a really good example with some of the metrics that we were looking for within developer productivity, I was hearing onboarding was a super huge pain, was a pain point, as you might, I'm seeing a lot of nodding, which is kind of classic problem. But we were going to ask for a bunch of investments in it, and I knew we needed some qualitative metrics. So we started looking at what our time to first intent PR was. And I think luckily through communities like this and through, kind of the connections that we've got, we were able to say, okay, are those numbers good or are those numbers bad compared to our peers? Surprise, they were bad compared to our peers. But that was really, really helpful for us to know. I was hearing incident management was a challenge for the business. Okay, great. Let's take a look at what our mean time to resolution is, what our mean time to mitigation is. And then again, let's compare. Is that good compared to our peers or is that bad? And I think that was really, really helpful to see those numbers. I felt like they were really illuminating, and I was really excited to share those with our leadership team. The next thing I wanted to understand from, a data perspective was what other things were our talent teams measuring for employee experience, and how do we also make sure that we're measuring for those things so that we could benchmark our programs not only with our peers outside of Peloton, but also with our peers inside of Peloton. So here's another fitness pun for you. We call our global onboarding program the warm-up. The warm-up measures things like accessibility, right? And so we want to make sure that if the warm-up has a really, really high accessibility score, that we carry that employee experience through with any tech onboarding program we build, and that we're also measuring for accessibility. And so that was really, really great to be able to kind of benchmark with internal programs as well. And then finally, this one selfishly was a little bit more for me, but also helped us really shape just what type of investment we would need. I spoke to a lot of subject matter experts, and as you can imagine, in a space where there isn't a formal tech learning function, there's a lot of organic subject matter experts creating documentation, all of this kind of stuff. So I wanted to understand how much content did we have on the programs that we were going to invest in, and what were we going to have to build net new, and what could we kind of leverage already based on what we had. So those were all of the numbers that I was able to get. And so this brings me to our second milestone, which is shaping our product catalog with all of this information. You're probably wondering, Thansha, what are you talking about? Why did you build a product catalog? Are you building software? Are you building shoes? Like, what kind of products are you building? And the answer is no, we aren't doing any of that. But like I mentioned a little bit earlier, you know, the leader who hired me is the VP of engineering, it's a platform engineering. And our platform engineering team really thinks about everything that they do as a product. And so core to that thinking is that we put users at the heart of everything we build. And the good way to think about it with tech learning is that there is no such thing as mandatory training at Peloton. So if you build the wrong thing, they will not come. And so building the right thing and building the right training programs was really, really critical. And thinking about what we offer as products on a shelf that people could pick up, that we could pick up and build was going to be really, really important. So we took all of that information and put it into what we call the tech learning product catalog. And you'll see that there's 3 key offerings that we have on our shelf. First is onboarding programs, continuing education programs, and then peer-to-peer learning programs. These 3 offerings ladder up to our mission, which is to onboard, grow, which is to empower engineers to onboard, grow, and share their skills at Peloton. Underneath those categories, we've got what those programs actually look like. And you'll see that instead of like aligning kind of this to, you know, a formal roadmap, which would box us into thinking about the next 6 months or the next year, because tech learning was a brand new function, we really wanted to be able to think about what do the next 2 to 3 years look like. And so we've got this bucketed out into the now and later. And we thought this would really resonate with our leadership team. So we've got something that we think will resonate with the leadership team. Now it was about getting buy-in and really building trust, which is milestone number 3 for us. So getting the buy-in was really pulling all of this information together. The very interesting thing that I discovered about Peloton is that our engineering team is actually distributed across different lines of business in the company. And so it's not actually centralized, which presents a very interesting challenge. Because I now had to get all of the right people in the room because I was creating something for all of them and not just the area that I sit in. So we had to bring all of these senior engineering leaders together to present this information. The really nice thing is they don't, you know, they obviously get chances to interact and things like that, but this is like a really great opportunity for them to all come together too. So that was really fun, bringing them all together. And then we did a qualitative and quantitative summary based on all of that information that we had. So we went in and we said, hey, this is what we're hearing. This is what people love about what we offer at Peloton so far, but this is where people are feeling like we're falling short. And then we added some quantitative, you know, information to that, which obviously when you're speaking to a room of engineering leaders, they love. And so we said, hey, these are the numbers that we're seeing. This is how it compares to our peers. And the piece that I thought really resonated with our leadership team was we said, this is what it's going to cost you. So if we don't invest in this, this is what it's going to cost us in terms of years of innovation because our developers aren't able to move as fast as they want to. This is what it's going to cost us in terms of workout minutes when every time an incident happens, and if we don't properly enable our teams to be able to manage those effectively. And those numbers really got the attention of our leadership team, and I would say really resonated with them, which then led to us making our investment ask and asking them to say, hey, these are the things we want to build. These are the things that we're going to need to get there. You know, let's go, like, let's do this. Luckily for us, this kind of approach really, really resonated with our leadership team. I think probably more than I expected it to. We ended up, in tech learning, ended up becoming a top line engineering priority for the business, which was really, really exciting for us to see, and also energizing, I would say, because we had gotten this buy-in and now we knew we needed to really build some trust. And so that was kind of the next thing, which is really where execution came in. Okay, great. Tech learning is a top line level priority. We needed to now execute. And so and to continue to build that trust. And so the first program we decided to tackle was tech onboarding. We had this really, really great stat. I'll say that with quotes. Great stat. It takes 22 days for our developers to get to their first pull request, which, as many of you might have guessed, is not a great number, especially when you're hiring, amazing engineering talent who wants to come in and they want to have an impact. And a lot of the people we hire are really passionate about the product, and so they want to have an impact right away. For an engineer to come in and to take 22 days for them to have their first impact is not great. So we built out our tech onboarding program, and we were able to get that number down to 3.5 days, which was really, really exciting for us. We had targeted 10 days because I truly believe in under promising and over delivering. So we said, okay, let's try and get this down to 10 days. We were able to get it down to 3.5 days. And that bought us a lot of trust from the business of, okay, great. Like this, you asked us for some investment and then you delivered, which was really, really, really good for us, because around that time, the business really started to shift and the business became a very different environment. And so, which is kind of leads me to milestone 4, which is how we decide how we were planned, but really stayed nimble throughout this time. So Peloton was starting to need to shift, and we were going to have to shift to meet Peloton where it was at. Peloton's business was pivoting, and so we were going to have to pivot too. Onboarding was no longer kind of the number one pain point that we were hearing in our conversations. And so what we did is we said, okay, let's go back to our product catalog and figure what we want to pull off the shelf and put on the shelf and put back on the shelf. And so instead of continuing to spend a lot of time refining onboarding, launching a V2, doing all these other things, we said, okay, great. Like we've hit some key milestones with that. We've gotten a lot of buy-in. Let's keep running tech onboarding the way that it is. And we had created this peer-to-peer learning program called the Subject Matter Expert Network, which really powered tech onboarding. Let's use that program to now power tech, to power continuing education for the business, because that was going to become really important. So we launched Tech Talks at the end of December. We now run 2 talks each month, which people are loving. It's really energizing the business to be able to hear how we do personalization, like how come my screen looks different than my partner's screen, all that kind of stuff, and really do that internal sharing and collaboration and really spark those conversations. And then we're shifting to building skills pathways. We're launching an incident management training at the end of the month, which we're really excited about. And you might have noticed, I didn't spend too much time chatting about this in the product catalog, but you might have noticed that at the bottom of the product catalog, we had something that said all of our product decisions and all of our program decisions were going to be informed by developer satisfaction. And so part of this is really what drove our thinking to move from tech learning to tech enablement. The developer satisfaction survey, not something that normally sits within a tech learning kind of function, but it was something that our leadership team, after all the work we had done with them, really felt like should sit with our team, because I think they were starting to see, a shift that we and this group have been talking about, where we're going from tech learning to tech enablement. We're not just talking about, hey, we're doing training because it promotes collaboration and it promotes morale and Marco and I talk about this thing of like, it's not really this fuzzy kind of thing. It's actually this thing that drives business results. And so that has been a huge shift for us, instead of just thinking about what the work that we do as tech learning. And when I came into the business 10 months ago, that's what we were talking about. And that's what I was talking about, to be completely honest, because that's also the world that I come from. But through the work that we've been able to do with our platform insights team, with kind of merging that qualitative and quantitative viewpoint, our leadership team has really kind of seen us in a different light, and that's forcing us to shift a little bit too into this tech enablement space, which is really exciting. And so developer satisfaction is something that sits under our team now, and so that's been a really, really fun thing for us to kind of pivot to. And so that's kind of my 10 months at Peloton. One thing I'll say is navigating this level of change, for tech learning is definitely not easy. And I think our job is to really support the business and support kind of the pivots that the business has to go through. And so being planned, but staying really flexible, I think has been really, really helpful for us to do. And the nice thing is that this approach has really seemed to resonate with our leadership team. Tech learning is still a top line business priority, and I am still reporting on it weekly. Unfortunately, I hate reporting, and I'm not a fan of writing reports, but I do it because I think it's really, really great. And I think it's a testament to, the buy-in that we've been able to get from our team as well. And that is all I have for you.
That's awesome.
And so I think we'll open up to questions.
Thanks, Thansha. Yeah, so this was what was super exciting to me was this story of how the company went through a change, right? Like there was a lot of layoffs and so on. And because you were able to reposition yourself, not just to be like this a learning thing, which is like almost like a nice to have, to actually enabling the product team, and through that enabling the velocity of product development, that became a strategic investment all of a sudden. And you survived, and not only that, but ended up thriving through the downsize and layoffs and all of that. So I think that's super, super amazing. So thank you for sharing. We had a few questions. Chris was asking about the size of your engineering organization, or like more specifically, how many people do you enable or are responsible for in terms of engineering?
Yeah, for sure. Our engineering team is hovering around 1,000. Don't quote me on that number. I want to say it's like 1,100, but it's like hovering around that 1,000 mark.
Yeah, and just a side note, compare that to Chris's 100,000 engineers. So I love it. So yeah, that's Microsoft. So the other question Chris had was about mandatory versus nice or optional, right? So there's, it's great that engineers get to vote with their own time and just kind of take the classes they want. But is it true that really nothing is mandatory for them? Like not even, it's usually there's something around secure coding best practices or some classes like that. Or
yeah, we don't mandate anything. And so everything that we do is like encouraged essentially for all of our engineering teams. The really nice thing is we see really, really high levels of participation and completion rates in the programs that we've been building so far. But yeah, Peloton just doesn't have like a mandate culture or like a compliance culture. I think there's like, we do like at the global level, there's obviously like compliance things that we have to do, and we do those, but at an engineering level, no.
That's cool. Cool. And so Chris and Jasmine had similar questions, which have to do with how there was a slide where you made a case for tech learning and tech enablement and why it's a strategic thing. And there was something about the calculation of innovation and like the years of innovation saved. And so all that sounds awesome in terms of like the story, but how do you actually back into that? How do you justify years of innovation or
Yeah, for sure. I didn't get into the nitty gritties because I wasn't sure how interested this group would be with all of this data stuff, but happy to dive into it and chat a little bit about it. And so what we looked at was time. We looked at time to first and 10th pull request. And so pretty standard measure of effectiveness for developers. That's pretty widely used across the industry. And so, the conversation that we had with our leadership team was like, hey, it takes us, I'm not gonna remember the exact numbers, but let's say it takes us 4 times as long to get our engineers up to efficiency, right? Like up to that 10th PR when they start. If we could get that number down to what is industry standard, you're saving all of that time because your engineers are able to innovate, they're able to build, they're able to, integrate with their teams. And when you have a company that is trying, that has a very demanding kind of member base, like our Marco and we were all joking a little bit earlier about how intense Peloton members are about the product. When you're able to say, hey, we can get our developers to work 3 times faster, we're able to, and it's not through making them work longer hours or something, like those things, but if we can make these systems better, if we can teach them things that help them find information quicker, that helps drive the time that developers are spending, like shipping code, innovating on different products, experimenting, which is really big for us, all of those types of things. So that's kind of the math that we did. And that really resonated with our team.
Got it. And I think Devin just had a question, like, how do you define that when they're up to speed? And so if I heard you correctly, it's about the 10th commit, right? So, and compressing that time, and then the ROI calculation is the delta between what it would have taken to the 10th commit before you and then with you. And so that difference between 28 days and 3.5 days is the savings that now presumably allows that engineer to be operating at full proficiency, right?
Yeah, and so we and for us it wasn't even really the 10th. Like for us it was really looking at the first commit, because that was where we were seeing a lot of lag in terms of like a new engineer starts and it takes them a long time to be able to like get the right access they need, to be able to figure out what tools they need to use. Like it was that time for us. And then obviously dragging that first time, it was 22 days to 3.5 days, being able to drag that time up drags up your 10th PR, all of that kind of stuff too.
Got it. And Sasha was asking this question. So you mentioned how you report into a VP of platform engineering, and that you have this pretty close relationship in terms of communicating your results. What exactly, or what kind of numbers or metrics do you report up to VP?
Yeah. So our time to first and 10th are things that we report on pretty regularly. We're going to start reporting on MTTR and MTTM, so time to resolution and mitigation for incident management. And then we're exploring like error budgets and SLOs as potentially something else that we'll also think about reporting on. We're just working through some of that now. But those are things that we report on regularly. And then we also just report on progress. So like, hey, like we launched this course or we launched this tech talk or whatever it is, like we also report on just like the work that the team is doing as well.
Got it. And anything in terms of attrition, retention, in terms of that, any metrics, do you own any of those metrics as well, or?
So our developer satisfaction survey, which we're building in partnership with, it's called our team member insights team. And so they handle Peloton's like larger engagement survey. And so that is the hope that like in a year from now, we'll report on things like retention and like all of that kind of stuff. But right now our talent team kind of handles that. So they report on those numbers, but we'll eventually partner with them when we do our developer satisfaction survey to build that out.
Got it. And when it comes to continuous education and like that peer-to-peer learning, Andrew actually had a question about this, and I've gotten this question in the past as well. How do you strike that balance between engineers are supposed to be shipping code, and yet they have this like vast opportunity to also level up and learn and do that continuously? Is that just up to them to vote with their feet or time, or is there some guidance or metrics or anything like that?
Yeah, we're not measuring that or any metrics around that. One of the things that we've been trying to encourage, and this model has worked really well with our subject matter expert network, is like we've been trying to encourage engineers to just add time for this into their sprint planning with their managers and to have these as a part of their conversations with their managers. And that seems to have worked really, really well so far with our subject matter expert network. So it's not like something that people are doing kind of on top of their day job, but they're doing as a part of their day job. And that encouragement seems to have worked really, really well so far. We do have like dedicated time for stuff like we'll have hackathons and things like that, where that time is kind of dedicated and set aside. But obviously learning needs to happen more regularly for engineers, and like and whether it's like learning yourself or teaching or coaching, that kind of model seems to work really well, where we say, hey, like actually intentionally add this into your sprint. And that seems to really work. And I think the nice thing about it is like when you're asking for an hour or two in your sprint planning, like it compared to all of the other like story points that you've got in your backlog, it doesn't seem like a lot, but it's really impactful for the engineer to have that time set aside.
Interesting. We actually last month we had a Paul from Salesforce talk about his experience there, and he actually made a similar argument. He made the argument that tech enablement today is the product velocity tomorrow, and then he argued for putting it into a sprint as a separate swim lane almost, right? So that like you're supposed to be paying forward this knowledge gap so that you experience velocity in the future.
Yeah. I think I see Alex on the call from Spotify. We were having a similar conversation about this. I think it was yesterday. All the days are kind of melding together, but I think it was yesterday around this too. And I think that kind of encouragement seems to be working really well. I would be super interested to kind of think about how we would measure that. I think an interesting kind of comparison could be something like tech debt, and we talk about this with, error budgets and things like that, right? Like at some point, like you need to stop the line and learn before, or like fix before you build out new features. And I wonder if there is a similar metric that we could think about for learning. I haven't cracked the code on it, but if anyone else has, let me know.
We are thinking about doing a panel discussion here at TechKnowCon on metrics and measuring success and all that. So this would be super interesting to kind of geek out as a group on what that might be. So I'd love to come up with something. So there are a couple of questions, I think, from Sasha on the team. So since you moved from tech learning to tech enablement and sort of presumably increased your scope, how has that affected the size of your team, if any? And also, how has that changed anything about your collaboration with other teams? You mentioned how you have a strong partnership with the HR L&D team. Anything else that changed in terms of a team structure, relationship with other teams? That's usually pretty interesting.
Yes. This is a very timely question because we're going into fiscal 23 planning. And so, yeah, there is like additional headcount asks that we're making asks for. We'll see if it goes through, fingers crossed. But it's been a conversation we've been having for a while. So I'm hopeful. And it's really interesting because I think, like we haven't changed our name to Tech Enablement or anything like that. But one of the things that I think is interesting with Peloton is because tech learning as a function itself was like so new. When I started, a lot of the conversations I was having, I kind of went in and was like, oh, well, like that's not really tech learning. Like we don't do that. And I think the developer satisfaction piece was really interesting because it was something that I actually pushed back quite a bit on when I first started at Peloton, where I was like, no, this isn't tech learning. This isn't what we do. And Jasmine from Netflix, you and I have had conversations about knowledge management. And again, I was kind of like, I don't really know if this is tech learning. Like, should this really be something that we own? And I think, throughout all my conversations, I've just kind of, we've had to shift because it's just what the business needed and it's what it needed tech learning to be. And so I think, like I'm having lots of conversations with my boss right now about like what our scope looks like and how we like make sure that that's supported and built out over time. But a lot of things that, so I come from Shopify and I spent, Andrew's on the call. Hello, Andrew. He and I used to work together in a past life. But when I worked at Shopify, one of the things like tech learning was very learning focused. And that's what we spent a lot of time doing. But at Peloton, I think our leaders saw it a little bit differently. And through the partnerships that we were able to build with talent and engineering, like I just found myself in this place where it was like just like a nice bridge. And I was just on a call earlier and I'm wearing pink and green and people on the call were wearing engineering and talent. They were wearing different colors. They're like, Thansha, look, you're bridging us just like you always do. And I think that has kind of become the narrative over the past 10 months. But it was something that I did push back on because I was like, I don't think this is what tech learning is. But through all the conversations that we've had, this, like this kind of increased scope became more natural part of our conversations. And so I'm thinking about my team very, very differently going into fiscal 23 planning than I was when I started at Peloton at the beginning of fiscal 22, where I had a very defined outlook. And I would even say, our VP, like my VP had a pretty, like he and I felt like we're very aligned on what we thought tech learning was. And then I think over the course of time, we've started to understand that the needs of the business are a little bit bigger than we thought they were. And so I think the interesting thing with people who work in tech learning is we can bridge this gap. Like we have enough understanding of what engineers do. But we've also kind of got this like glue kind, like we're almost like a glue, right? Like, because we can bridge these gaps between talent and engineering. And I think that that's really special.
Yeah, it's almost a more strategic and for the business as opposed to, like I said, like nice to have. And you've been positioning yourself as that sort of something that you unlock certain capabilities of the business, and that I think that's special. So very cool. Any other questions? Yeah, the difference between learning and enablement. We've been having that conversation as well. It's a little bit of a nod to sales enablement, where that kind of started from.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing with this word enablement is like so much of learning is about enablement. And so it almost feels like a natural evolution for tech learning. In my world, at least it does. So yeah.
Well, my experience was also when I was running this at Twitter, I would always have to justify to leadership, what's the big deal about learning, right? Like, why learning? It sounds like a vitamin. It sounds like nice to have. It's so optional, right? But enablement is totally the opposite, right? Like, you're actually unlocking something. You're giving a superpower to the team, and it becomes really different. So yeah, cool. So let me see. There's a question from Alex. What do you see the overlap between tech learning, knowledge management? Is there a boundary there, or is knowledge part of that? Or
yeah, there is no boundary at Peloton because it's like a wide open ocean. And it's been this fun little game where I'm like, no, we don't own knowledge management, and then the ball keeps getting tossed back into my court. It's like a hot potato. And so one of the things that we've been exploring is just how we can empower knowledge management through things like good documentation, through whether it's tools. So we're exploring, we don't have like a Stack Overflow right now. So that's the tool that we're exploring. And I think knowledge management fits really nicely into tech learning, because so right now, I think a good example is this incident management training that I'm creating. I think there's like 34 different pages on how to do incident management at Peloton in our Confluence, which is obviously a very confusing experience for people. And I think good training often starts with, like, we need that strong documentation, right? I think, and so it seems to fit in quite nicely, but it's definitely something that we're exploring. And I'm very interested to see where it will go. But Alex, to answer your question, the line is not clear.
Got it. And to riff off of that, what are the common modalities? Like, is this mostly live learning that happens across, for onboarding and continuous education and so on, or is it more workshops and classes, or one-on-one mentorship, coaching, office hours? Like, what are the different modalities you lean on in different cases?
Yeah. So we have a lot of instructor-led and async right now. We are exploring a tool, Plug for Skills Exchange, with Alex's team at Spotify. So we're really, really excited about that for some of those more like one-on-one, like pairing, mentoring, those pieces. But right now what we're doing is a lot of instructor-led stuff. So a lot of event-based learning and a lot of async learning. So like documentation, that kind of thing. One of the things we're finding is we're getting a lot of positive feedback on our instructor-led sessions, just people getting an opportunity to connect with each other in kind of the remote world, I think is really interesting. And it's, I think it's particularly interesting because when I think back to March 2020, there seemed to be a huge push in tech learning to move everything to async because we were all going remote and instructor-led learning was becoming difficult. But I think what we're seeing after 2 years of pandemic and everyone working from home is that instructor-led piece is actually quite popular. And so, yeah, we're seeing more of that breakdown. So I would say we do have in like async stuff, but really we're trying to like create as much of those connections as we can.
Got it. And we've heard this a couple of times. So the pendulum swung sort of more to async with pandemic, and now it's kind of swinging back, and because people need that connection more and more. So that's really interesting to hear.
Yeah. And then one thing I'll just add is, so we just had a tech talk on our machine learning team. Just ran a tech talk on how we do personalization at Peloton. It's kind of top of mind, but the really interesting thing was like in that conversation, as a result of that conversation, there was 3 other teams that were working on things that had ideas on how like machine learning could support the work that they were doing and how, and like make personalization better. And I was having a conversation with our machine learning engineer who ran that talk. And he's like, these are the kind of serendipitous, like coffee cooler conversations that I'm missing out on because I started remotely and I'm not getting those conversations and those connections. So that's something we're actually tracking now in our speaker feedback form for tech learning or for tech talks, is like, how many of these kinds of connections did you as a speaker like make after giving this tech talk? And like, are these gonna result in new product features or new like cross-team collaboration things? So we've just started tracking that. I'm really, really excited to see like what that ends up to be. My hypothesis is that we will actually get some like innovation and product features, just the way that Peloton works, that we will see some of that when we put people in the room together to have these types of conversations.
Got it. Yeah, cross-pollinating the knowledge across the company, right? And we've seen that usually creates innovation when different viewpoints collide. So that's cool to see. I think Laura had a question about the role of your LMS in supporting your work and reporting. Anything on the tool side that you'd like to share that you're excited about?
I am not a huge fan of our LMS. I've complained to Marco about it. So I think the reporting on our LMS isn't that great. And because we've got data scientists on our team, like that work with us, we've been actually, they can do things like, you know, like look, like you, I'm going to butcher how it's done technically, but they can like pull the GitHub API and like pull up all this information about how our engineers are working and all of this kind of stuff. And we use Fire Hydrant for incident management. They can like comb through that and give us all of this data. So we actually haven't been doing a lot of, we actually haven't been leveraging a lot of the reporting that our LMS currently offers. And like, yeah, we can't even track like attendance on our LMS. It's really annoying. So we haven't been using that. A lot of the reporting and stuff that we do actually comes from pulling stuff from the engineering tools itself. So like the tools that our engineers use. And honestly, I think it's worked out for us because I think engineering leaders are quite skeptical of like the things that like completion rates and attendance, like they're kind of like, okay, whatever. I think being able to say, hey, like we pulled data from GitHub and this is what it's telling us, or like we pulled information from Fire Hydrant, or we pulled information from wherever. I think that stuff has actually helped. Yeah.
Cool. Very cool. Any other questions from the audience? Well, thank you, Thansha.